Hello listeners, Joanna here from Mindful Counseling, also known as JDS Counseling. You can also find me and follow me on YouTube at JDS Counseling. That's where you can see some of my videos that I focus on when it comes to mental health with one of my wonderful colleagues. So one of the topics today, which I think is quite important for most of us, and I hope we're all open to this discussion, or at least the curiosity of it too, but it is May, and here in the U.S., we talk about mental health stigma in the month of May. And what that means is how important mental health is for us. And a lot of times when we hear the word mental health or mental health illness, we automatically assume that there's something negative almost connected to it. And I figured it would be a great idea to focus on this today and just in general every single day for most of us to be aware of how important mental health is and how to have conversations with those around us about mental health, focusing on anxiety, depression, and not necessarily labeling whether someone has OCD or maybe, quote unquote, is bipolar. And we have a tendency to do that a lot, focusing on labeling others on their mental health instead of understanding others, having empathy, sympathy, compassion. So mental health stigma and how some of us have a tendency to look against it or not wanting to discuss it, or we dismiss it, or we brush it off. Sometimes when we hear others talk about how they're feeling, if they're anxious or depressed, we automatically try to sort of dismiss the conversation by saying depression is fine, depression is normal, and to move on, versus actually hearing sometimes what the other person is saying. So I think my message for you all today is really just focusing on being able to discuss mental health, being able to discuss our anxieties, our depression, and sometimes our home situations. And how do we respond to ourselves in our inner dialogue, but also how we respond to others who might have these conversations with us about their mental health and what do we do in some of these situations. And I think by talking about mental health with our colleagues, friends, coworkers, managers, whoever it is that we choose to discuss it with, is it allows us to be more upfront of how common it is to speak about our feelings and not to necessarily dismiss it. Now, what I'm also not saying is, or what I'm trying to say, I should say, is not to focus on feelings 24 hours a day. I'm not saying this, right, when it comes to mental health, but the ability to at least communicate it, of how important it is to speak to someone and how important it is to seek help. And that's another issue that comes up. And I don't think it's much of an issue since last year, because I feel like with COVID, not only my office, but I know many of us therapists, counselors, psychologists, and you name it, we have become very, I'm not going to use the words overwhelmed, but lack of a better word, I will say overwhelmed. Booked. We are overbooked because a lot of individuals do need to speak to someone. We all need to speak to someone. And I would hope that because of the pandemic, we have become more knowledgeable in the sense of how important it is to seek help. And that it is not something to avoid. It is not something to disregard or brush off. Anxiety, depression, fear is all real. And what happens is that when we do not know how to process it, resolve it, even though we might think that we do, and maybe in some cases we can take care of it by having appropriate coping mechanisms and things that work and distractions, at the same time, sometimes it becomes overwhelming. And fear can be overwhelming. Anxiety, very much so, can be overwhelming. Thinking too much can be overwhelming. And we have a difficulty stepping away from it, because what our brain does is it has a tendency to focus on something and it can spiral it down. We overthink, and then it goes worse and it gets worse. And then we try to substitute it by maybe unhealthy coping mechanisms such as drinking or other substances that would make sense in that moment. So once again, mental health stigma, and that it is not something to avoid. It is not something to take for granted. And also be mindful that we don't want to dismiss mental health. And we have a tendency to belittle mental health or the stigma against it. And sometimes we internalize it, that there's some shame and guilt attached to mental health stigma. Because we're in therapy, all of a sudden we might think that there's something wrong with us. Or because we are in therapy or in counseling, or because we're talking to a professional, sometimes we might think that others may not accept it, or that we are in some ways disabled, or that we may not get hired for a particular job, or maybe hold a promotion. So there's so much stuff that is attached to mental health, quote unquote, stigma, and how we all look at it in sometimes such a negative way. So once again, my message is all about being able to speak up about mental health, to speak up about normalizing, I will say, sometimes the anxiety and depression, fear, in the sense that it is okay to feel these things, and what is it that we can do about it to take care of ourselves, as well as how to help others who might possibly need it, instead of dismissing other people's conversations about their anxiety, their fears, their moods and depression. Being able to empathize with others, have compassion, and let them know that you are there listening, and let them know that they can always reach out to someone to speak about it, because we have a tendency to dismiss these feelings. I think just as human beings, we're very good at dismissing what we do not want. We're very good at dismissing what we do not like. And my focus really as a mental health practitioner is to accept mental health, and also to not stigmatize it or put some form of a label on it, but to actually look at it as the same way as if you were looking at someone, I'm thinking, with a physical disability or physical illness. Is that physical illness or disability needs to be taken care of, and with whether it's with those around us or professionals, and needing to take care of it in a sense of getting better, healing. The same thing is with mental health. There's a difference, yet similarity, about taking care of our bodies physically, but also at the same time being able to take care of our bodies mentally. So I want you all to think about that. Both of those in some ways are so related, and how much of an importance it is to take care of yourself as much as it is physically, but to also to take care of yourself mentally. So that way we can become stronger. We can become more confident and have a sense of self-worth and higher self-esteem in order to move forward. By dismissing all of these things, whether it's physical or even mental, is we're not taking care of ourselves. And I have a tendency to say, and I'll say this as a mental health practitioner, is that we have one life, one. And how do we want to look at it? How do we want to experience it? How else can we seek healing in order to move forward? So I'm going to leave you all with a message that I have on my desk today. And I have one of those calendars with quotes on it and messages for the day. And the message that I have for today, which I think is a great way to just kind of end this podcast, is to live is the rarest thing in the world. Most people exist. That is all. So once again, this is just a message that is on my beautiful purple calendar on my desk. And the message for today is, to live is the rarest thing in the world. Most people exist. That is all. So take this podcast, take my message, as I'm telling you about the ability to take care of your own mental health, the stigma against it, and how can you apply it along the ability of taking care of yourself and not just to exist. Once again, this is Joanna from Mindful Counseling. You can see me, you can hear me also on YouTube at JDS Counseling. Please subscribe, share, like, and hopefully enjoy. Until next time, be well and be safe.